Buenas tardes y bienvenidas, bienvenidos en el Goethe-Institut de Madrid. Bienvenidos.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the Goethe-Institut and welcome to this fourth conference that we organize within the context of our European program, Deconfining Art, Culture and Policies in Europe and Africa. This is a project with 12 partners in Europe and 9 partners that collaborate in Africa, financed by the European program Europa Creativa, Creative Europe. So this stems from cooperation between cities, because for us it was very interesting to look at things at this level, at the level of cities, not so much of states, but of cities and municipalities. And above all, we have been working or collaborating with the cities that are part of the European Capital Program and the African Culture Capitals in Africa. And the idea is to learn from each other, to learn together, but also to learn on social confinement, political, cultural lines that divide us, and also how to imagine more sustainable and well-balanced relations. And here we organize a conference every year, and we offer artistic residences to accompany this conference that are interesting and relevant for the project, so for at a meta global level, if you want to call it that way, and this is even more important for us here in Madrid, we want it to be relevant and interesting for the local community, for the local context. Artists, organizations, journalists, all of them, all these people who work on these subjects here based on the Spanish reality, in the reality in Madrid. In the past few years in these conferences, we've talked about spatial and territorial confinement, also about social and environmental confinement. Today, we would like to focus on the most economic and political aspects. So in the first panel session, we're going to talk about financing systems that perpetuate power relations. And the second panel will be on the memory as a resilience tool. At this time, we will be connecting with our Polish colleagues, Art Transparency, who today are opening a festival in Poland that is called Survival 23. And we will get to know some of the artists that are invited to attend that festival, which is also part of the Deconfining project. And then after the two panel sessions, we would like to invite Max Cholik, who is an author, a poet, a public voice, a very important one in Germany, who on the one hand will close this part of the event here in this auditorium indoors with with a reflection, but also with an introduction to the work of the Coalition for Pluralistic Public Discourse, CPPD. So, CPPD, which, because this coalition has thought about the dynamic lab, our lab.
Vamos a inaugurar esta tarde
The memory lab, which is going to, where we're going to start the colonization cycle, which is a part of this day too. So there's a second part to this event that will be held in the Memory Dynamic Lab. And so this is a program we have in store for you. And we are also collaborating with Conciencia Afro.
y también con OSICAN.
And also with OSICAN.
quiero agradecer a
Greenhouse for Creation. I'd like to thank all of you for your collaboration, CPPD, Vivero de Creación, for putting your trust in us and for your collaboration. I'd also like to thank Julia and the whole team from the Goethe-Institut, as well as the technicians, Domingo's team, also the interpreters who do a magnificent job. Thank you very much. And to all the participants who are here, but who are also following us online. And of course, the people who have decided to join us here. Now, we have a slight problem with the air conditioning, as you will have felt, those of you who are here. It failed about half an hour ago. We realized half an hour ago that it was not working, but the technicians are trying to fix it. And we also have these fans. And when we go outside, let's hope it's a bit fresher than in here.
esta jornada, esta tarde.
And we hope that this will be a starting point for more reflection on these subjects, more projects, and more events, because I truly believe they are very important. Thank you.
Y ahora voy a pedir.
And now I'd like to ask Silvia Mann, who will be chairing the first panel session, to introduce the participants of this first panel session.
Microphone. I will switch to English for those who need translation. Yes, very warm welcome to this first panel. And I want first to invite Wafa from Culture
Funding Watch.
Culture Funding Watch to have a seat with me.
Thank you.
So that I do not feel so alone here. And I don't know if, yes, I see already my other panel participants. Warm welcome to you in the virtual space too. We will have roughly an hour together in order to discuss about funding. And as you know, it's not only about funding programs. It's about financing, it's about ecosystems, it's about a wider context in order to understand how funding for culture, but specifically also in the context of intercontinental cooperation or international cooperation should and can evolve. Time has changed quite a lot, as we can observe every day. When we wake up, hear news or watch news somewhere, the globe is turning quite rapidly, and all this together will certainly also affect the cultural ecosystems, and in that sense also then financing, funding, frameworks, and programs, still also programs. Maybe to start, not with the question, just maybe to start with presenting ourselves so that our audience here and online knows a little bit who is talking here. And I say only 2 words to myself. My name is Silvia Amann. I'm based in Austria. I'm working for more than 25 years in cultural policy development and cultural development. And this brought me, of course, also to the topic of funding and financing, so you cannot avoid that. And I have my paper here in order to do not make mistakes when I present my, my dear panel here with me on the screen and close to me. And if you allow that, I will maybe first start with Wafa, who is very close to me. So we said already, Culture Funding Watch. Yes, yeah. Based in Tunisia, yeah, but very active in a lot of contexts. I think you work also quite a lot in the UNESCO context. Also, you are one of the partners in Deconfining. I've read also with interest that you were selected as one of the 100 most influential creatives of African descent in 2021. and then very powerful and digital Africa ambassadors, and you work quite a lot on ecosystems for cultural and creative industries, do a lot of research, but also services.
Yeah.
Thank you for being with us and for having had the time to come to Madrid. And this brings me to the screen.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. I see maybe here first Eloisa Vaelo Marco. I hope pronunciation was not too bad. Eloisa is now the head of the Department of Cultural Cooperation at the Spanish Development Agency, if I say that correctly. And you have a lot of international experience, also very powerful academic background, master in international relations, postgraduate degree in African studies, and you did also a lot of practical things like, I think, Africa Film Festival, which links also again to our intercontinental setting we are having today in Madrid. And last not least, yes, Filina Wittke. I think you are today in Johannesburg or somewhere on the African continent at least, yeah? Maybe you will tell us a little bit later. You are working in cooperation and development projects, I think, for more than 10 years. And also in research networks, and you are expert also in funding. Yeah, so for third-party funding, and currently I think you are coordinating 4 large-scale EU projects in sub-Saharan Africa for the Goethe-Institut. Maybe we will also then talk a little bit about that. So, I think we are ready to start. I look again into my round. I must admit it's a little bit difficult to watch you, my audience here, and the screen at the same time. So don't take it personally when we at certain moments look more on the screen than on you. So it's not by mistake. Let's start. Yeah. And maybe, as I already said in my introduction, that times feel a little bit tough. And also normally when we talk about financing and funding for culture, the cultural and creative sectors, it's often that we have kind of feeling it was always tough and it was always difficult and it was always a topic which worried lots of people in the cultural ecosystems. Will we have the budget for next year? Can we apply somewhere? And of course, there is also differences on the both continents. And maybe this time I would like to start with a question for Filina. And it's when you reflect on all the experiences you have made with funding ecosystems, funding programs, what is really good? What do we have in place? What really works? And what helps us and what can maybe also help us in the longer run? Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. Thank you very much for the invitation. I feel very honored to be on this panel and to be able to speak about funding systems, which is a topic very close to my heart. And I'm going to be speaking from the perspective of the project lead of the Africa-Europe Partnerships for Culture, a position I have resumed on the 1st of May 2025. The Africa-Europe Partnerships for Culture is a 30 million euro project that was developed by the EU delegations in Sub-Saharan Africa, a bottom-up initiative that solely focuses on cultural exchange. And that is obviously great news. That is what should be in place, and that is a good practice, I think. It is great news that EU delegations in the region, meaning the people on the ground, recognize culture as a major tool for connection, understanding, and common development in the Bandung definition of the term. That is, in my opinion, especially relevant between Africa and Europe, where preconceived ideas and century of power imbalances hinder honest, transparent, real, and valuable encounters. So I will have to ask the question which funding systems are well in place with the answer programs like this, where we have room to explore and negotiate. programs that focus on intercultural creative exchange, dialogue, and mutual learning and co-creation. Because, and I'm quoting from the action document of the program I'm currently working with, culture has always had a prominent place and a factor in facilitating mutual knowledge and understanding, people-to-people dialogue, and, as I would like to highlight, respect for diversity and social inclusion. Only when we create safe and brave spaces of actual encounters of the minds, spirits, and imaginations, we can create new narratives of cultural exchange and intercultural collaboration. Cultural encounters offer these spaces. Culture plays a powerful role in connecting people across boundaries because it supersedes, and I'm preaching to the choir, singing to the choir, geographic, linguistic, generational, and ideological limitations. Culture gives people a sense of their own identity, rooted in shared language, tradition, values, and history, but it also invites people to gain insights into other people's identities in ways that are not limited to intellectual or verbal exchange. It thus fosters belonging within and between people, creating curiosity, connection, and emotional bonds among individuals. Cultural expressions thus communicate emotions and ideas that words alone cannot, enabling deeper human connection. Culture invites holistic experiences through music, dance, art, food, and storytelling, and thus provides universal forms of expressions that transcend language barriers. In doing that, culture contributes to peace and security. If we are willing to not only listen, but to unlearn, to sit in the uncomfortable of not knowing, and accept perspectives and positionalities that are unfamiliar and uncomfortable. How is this very theoretical approach now translatable and translated into our programs and projects? In the development of our project proposal, we already tried to create these spaces of connection in the design phase. That means we studied evaluation reports of previous projects. We conducted design workshops with artists, arts managers, and cultural entrepreneurs, and invited experts from Africa to write the project description with us to make sure the program correctly conceptualizes the intercultural exchange, analyzes the needs, and provides the tool to improve and increase the creative exchange between Africa and Europe. Working with these experts required a lot of patience because concepts, approaches, methods, and implementation strategies varied hugely. That is difficult in itself, but more difficult when we actually want to change the narratives and the systems. Some of the experts we worked with have been working with the EU and European partners for years. They know the language, the concepts, and the implementation mechanisms that we are used to. Wanting to develop new ways of intercontinental artistic and cultural cooperation requires to also challenge them while being very comfortable with the tools, sectors, and formats they suggested. So a good practice and a lesson learned is to involve the relevant target groups and stakeholders in the design of the project already. That makes it possible to holistically think through cultural value chains in different contexts on the ground, increasing the impact of the projects and ensuring the sustainability of the results. Only when we include diverse voices and polyphonic, nonlinear, and multidimensional perspectives in the design phase already, we are also able to foster constructive dialogue in the implementation phase. This approach has, in my opinion, the potential to enhance mutual understanding and promote innovative solutions to emerging challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This was a deep insight now in the new program, and we hear that co-creation and participation is really across continents. And as you've talked a lot about Europe-Africa, EU-Africa relations, I think we must provide a little bit of time to our colleague Wafa in order to react a little bit on what are your related experiences, maybe also to focus on some positive points, but from an African perspective. Wafa, please go ahead.
Thank you. Just an introduction, what we do with regards to, because we're talking about funding and mechanism, and I want to share with you the perspective of someone from the Global South. I don't pretend to represent the whole Africa, because Africa is not one country. But I can tell you that when we talk about funding, we don't talk about getting grant from international aid partners. When we talk about sustainability of resources for the art and culture sector, I think we talk about the challenges we're facing when it comes to the variety of resources, the scarceness of the resources, and the mechanism that we lack in place. And usually when there is a debate around funding, I feel like the discussion is always crystallized around grants. There is a lot of education to be done. And what's amazing and surprising in our work with Culture Funding Watch is we started to realize that the lack of the education when it comes to resource mobilization, and I prefer the word resource mobilization than funding, because funding historically refers only to grants. While when we talk about resource mobilization, we're talking about diversity of resource and the sustainability, whether it's an institution or a business in the art and culture sector, lays in our capacity to vary the type of resources we work in. And there are so many of them, but the capacity building, the training, and even the leaders, sometimes even in Europe, when you talk about funding the arts, everybody's talking about grant, EU programs, institutional cooperation support mechanisms, and even institutional local, where there are so many other resources. And when we do training in capacity building, usually I say to the people, day one on the capacity building is to recalibrate your radar. I compare us as a cultural people when it comes to the art and culture. We have you have a radar that it's calibrated to capture only one type of waves. So you miss everything else. When you scan around you, you miss everything else. So that's one problem we have. The second is the perception of what is a sustainability. What does it mean? What's to be sustainable, either as an institution or a business in the art? There is a huge difference between the financial flow and the sustainability. You can bring so much money in grant, 1 million, 4 million euros grant, but you are zero sustainable. Because a grant is the money that gets in and has to go out. It's different from a resource like unrestricted resources, it's different from investment, it's different from income generating activities, it's totally different. That's one thing. And one, also the mindset it changed. Define growth. We still have this capitalistic definition of a growth for an artist, whether it's actually it's cross-sector. It's not related to the art only. So in the mindset, when you strategize, you put your strategy for your institution, your business, in the art and every other sectors, the growth is equal to financial volume increase, but not necessarily profitability or sustainability. Growth, we are in the system that, to grow, it's to be bigger, 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 but the point is not there. You can get bigger depending on grants and you have zero impact. You can be bigger in terms of volume, but you have very little impact and you have very little sustainability, because if you are a grant-funded organization, you're never sustainable. And we've seen what happened now with the USAID. Cut, dead. So yeah, you could be big, but you're not sustainable. And this mindset, when it comes to international cooperation, and I just want to open a bracket here, because when it comes to sustainability of the sector, when it comes ecosystem approach, supporting the art sector in Africa, it really pains me when we talk about discussion how to tackle the sustainability and access to resources in my continent, that is, the debate is always about how to get more fund from external resources. It feels like the message that has been sent as a cultural actor from Africa or from Tunisia, at least, I will talk about the ecosystem that I know the most, that the best I could hope for is more charity. While if there is a real partnership in development, the objective of these partnerships should be that I don't need you anymore. Hence, this working on local ecosystem, where we should work on finding ways so that there is a grow of local resources. We need to concentrate on our ecosystem and say why we don't have enough philanthropists, why we don't have CS.
I stop you now.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Because you are already in the whole ecosystem.
Yes.
But I think what was really important, I think when I would summarize, and you correct me if I'm not right, but I think what you think is positive now is that there is a change of mindset underway. Yeah. When we were maybe thinking 10 years ago, it was more or less, how can I get more grants and how can I maybe professionalize this application process? And now you have the feeling there is a real movement that things change on the African continent, and the first step is changing mindset, own mindset.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, correct. That's perfect. This brings me to Eloisa. And because when we talk about grants, and you have now heard an example of a big grants program, then also the comments from WAFA, attention, it's a high-risk strategy, but at the same time, as a national agency, from a state, from a European state, grants is something you treat your whole life. So what is your perspective? How do you see developments in international cultural relations, related funding programs, etc.? What type of maybe positive, weak signals do you detect? The floor is yours. Go ahead.
Okay, como le expliqué a Julia.
As I explained, Julia, I'm going to speak in Spanish. I understand English, but I can't speak in English. I'd rather speak in Spanish.
Díganme si tengo que ir más despacio, pero bueno.
Okay, so first of all, before I answer your question, which had to do with grants, I work at the cooperation department of the Spanish Aid Agency. And we have two departments. We have the cooperation department.
Y tenemos el departamento.
We have the grants department. But of course, I'm going to answer your question. Because my expertise and what I really know most about is what we do in our department, which is to work on cooperation departments with African countries. But in the grants department, we have 3 lines of work with Africa. On the one hand, we have grants for Spaniards who are specialized in cultural management, always with a focus on culture for social transformation, culture for development, etc. So we send scholars who have a grant to Africa to work there. We also send people to teach Spanish at African universities. And then in the opposite direction, which is, I guess, what you're looking for about 5 years now, we are increasing the number of grants that are given to African professionals at different levels. So we have grants to do a stage in the Spanish embassy. In the Spanish administration. Oh, they come from Africa to work in a given department of the Spanish administration. And the next line, which is the most requested one,
Cuando estudiantes
when students from any African country want to do a master's degree or a PhD in a Spanish university, which is the next line of grants that we provide. And then the third line is the most open one. It's not for civil servants, but maybe you want to take a course, a workshop in Spain. So that would be the third line of grants that African citizens can access.
Overview. Maybe could you reflect a little bit? What do you think is the most forward-looking line? What is something you feel will be really needed in the upcoming 10 years, for example?
Bueno,
Well, if we focus on the work we do in cultural cooperation, we have lots of different interests. For example, in the cultural centers in Equatorial Africa and Malawi and other places, Malabo and Bata are the two most important cities in Equatorial Guinea. And from there, we are promoting a project which is for artistic residences and mobility for artists who come from African or Latin American background. The idea is to generate a whole network of artists so that they can get to know each other and learn what is being done in terms of art in their countries in Latin America and Africa. And for example, there has been a huge interest for people in Latin America with African background to be able to have a residence for a period of time in an African country. And the same thing goes for African artists. Maybe a poet of Equatorial Guinea who could work on a literary project maybe in Latin America. This is one of the projects that we are actually working on in Cartagena de Indias to reinforce all these projects, and that we think they have a future.
Eloisa, so we see maybe in many of the statements we have already heard, it's a lot of bringing people together, networking, building connections, also to re-establish maybe old connections which are difficult to materialize, also to generate a certain visibility. So we have already a long list of objectives when we provide money for activities, but we are still very much in this context. There is a program and there is funding. Maybe let's dig now a little bit deeper into the ecosystems of financing and funding. And I jump back to Wafa, sitting close to me. So when you see, so we are having in fact 3 ecosystems, if we simplify. We have a European one, which works in a certain manner and which has a certain background and also tradition when we think about international cultural relations and then related frameworks from visa to funding. Yeah. And on the other side, we have if we look at the historic backgrounds, a different kind of development on the African continent, with also huge diversity of approaches and fields. So when you reflect a little bit on these ecosystems, and when we have this aim of better connecting, networking, working more together, etc., what should be improved, or what would be the specific needs in order to bring forward sustainable, I've got your message, sustainable ecosystems, yeah? And integrated as much as possible.
Yeah. I think sorry, I'm listening to myself.
Yes.
I think the key for successful relation is an equal relationship. So when the power balance and the partnership, they are not questioning, when there is someone who is counting on the charity of the other, we'll never have a healthy relationship. So to really, if we really want to have this real cooperation, we need to work together on having more balance in the relationship in the art and culture. And from my perspective of expertise, when it comes to funding, because there are this matter has different levels. So I will talk about the financing level of it for the art. And I think for us, the key is to work on local ecosystem to be capable to provide independence for the local art sector, so we can, when we sit together, as you mentioned, like building programs together, we are in more healthy relationship. For example, as much as I do respect the approach of this concept of fair cultural cooperation, no, I don't want a fair cultural cooperation, because fairness does not question the power balance and the statu quo. Fairness, that means I depend on your good willing to be fair and correct. And we have seen today, what does that really on the practice means? Nothing. If you leave your rights depending on somebody's good behavior, you get exterminated. So that's something that, I mean, it applies also to the cultural sector. It's at the different level. I'm exaggerating, everybody knows me. I like to provoke. But at another level, it's exactly the same thing. So I think for us to have a healthy relationship is that ecosystem in the global south in general work on building that ecosystem that allows the rise and the growth of local philanthropists, foundations, and systems. And that requires a full-time job, that requires an investment on years. I just finished a study on philanthropy on Northern Africa with the Arab Foundations Forum Network. And they started actually with the Tunisian Foundation to see why they don't give that much in the art. What's preventing, And one of the main findings, it's not, you could say part of it there is the education, understanding the sector. We are a sector that is misunderstood. We know all that. But one of the interesting findings of the study, it was apparently related to the career perspective. So people, when they start, I mean, we're talking about the head of the few foundation we have, we just realized that they don't see even a career perspective. So the bright minds don't see future. So you don't have bright minds on the head of those organizations. Second, we have a barrier of legal framework. In basically all North African countries, there is no legal status for foundation. So either you are an NGO or a business. And that does not encourage any rich or small enterprise to start. On the other hand, there are some good examples. For example, in Tunisia, you have the CSR law. This law imposes by law on like a big-size companies to put 1% of their annual net profit in social project and support. So that's very good, because that's by law. Our government made sure that there is a tap. It's not one time. Every year, those companies have to pay their taxes. So it was very smart. However, where we were not very good was that we were not organized to fight for our share from that 1%. So it's good. So there is the legal framework had opened the opportunity. It's up to us now to educate our private sector people, our foundation, and you have good examples of good local foundation and philanthropists. And that brings me, for example, in the cultural cooperation, how we design projects. We need to have more ecosystem approach to cooperation design projects. What we're doing in CFW at the continent level, this education, this advocacy, this research, It's extremely hard to fundraise for. There is no, how to say, une case. There is no box that I fit in. What I do, if I knock on the door of any of you and say, oh, I want to organize what we do actually now, something we call it the resource mobilization digital, where we bring all people who support the art together in one place, foundation, investors, and we do lots of education. This we've been doing it by our own money and investment, partly because we believe in that. That's the strategy of CFW, but it's hard to get into those frameworks. So we need, a cooperation also needs to have ecosystem approach and work on the whole value chain players in those ecosystems.
Thank you very much, Waf. And this brings me back to Eloisa, because I think some of the elements which Wafa just mentioned were also part of the programs you are offering. For example, research cooperation and similar. Maybe that you quickly react on that. And in addition, maybe also from your point of view, as you have also the South American perspective, which I find very valuable also in our context. So also to see how, if you feel that the situation there is similar or different, and maybe also how you see a potential to bring up a triangular, in the positive sense, not in the historic one, cooperation settings in order to once write a positive history. So the floor is yours and I take the headphones. Go ahead.
Bueno, yo diferenciar.
Well, I would differentiate projects. I'm sorry, I'm getting feedback.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Ok. Nosotros, al ser agencia de cooperación,
Because we are a cooperation agency, we work with public funds from the government in Spain. And I don't have that much experience with regards how or when we can look for other funds, because we work with the funds that the AICID itself has, the Spanish Agency for Cooperation. But here I would underscore two very important points. When we know that there's going to be a summit, an international summit for funding purposes to be held in Seville, you know that we're not going to really hear talk about cultural actions. We're not going to hear any debate. Nothing with regards to cultural cooperation is going to be discussed. That was something that we thought was noteworthy, because we try to launch a cultural line which has been rejected and will not be included in the summit. That on the one hand. And then there's another series of projects that we're involved in which have to do with what Wafa said. And I also heard it mentioned before by Felina. We also always try to ensure that the projects that we're involved in be projects that actually come from the citizens, that be launched as a result of ongoing dialogue established with the territory, with the country, with the team that we're working with. So I think a long time ago, we stopped working with projects that were designed in an office somewhere in Madrid. We have a branch office in Mali, and we receive projects from civil society. They are studied. We see which ones are more appropriate and which may be funded thanks to Spanish cooperation. That's the way we go about it. Now, just recently, we've launched another project, which is called Africana Labs, and we now are designing it. It's a collaborative effort. We're going to be meeting in Mali with a number of different entities from civil society, from Mali, from Mauritania, and from Senegal, in order to jointly co-design the laboratories that will allow us to build a cultural approach with a feminist and gender-based approach. These labs will be open and participative, and they will be designed for women's associations that may recommend that projects be studied that will improve their lives on a daily basis as inhabitants of a city. So an example is the launch of participative projects that are recommended to us from the place itself, if you will. Different associations that are on the ground are the ones who actually come up with these ideas. And we've got another type of project also, which target the different public institutions and entities of the countries that we work with in Africa, in the Middle East, and in Latin America. These are projects that are aligned with culture and development, but along different angles. So technical reinforcement for the consolidation of public institutions. And I think that it's easier to understand what we're doing if I share some examples with you. We have two projects underway. One is in Senegal, the other is in Mozambique, and they have to do with the conservation and restoration of the film archives of the National Film Library in Mozambique. We're working with the film morgue to build better spaces with the right humidity, taking conservation into account, learning about storage, about curatorship, about restoration of this type of physical material, the films proper. And along those lines, there's another very similar project that we have up and running in Senegal with the St. Louis University. And what we want is to ensure that the conditions are appropriate for the storage, archiving of photographs that the university has, and which focuses on the history of Senegal.
Perfect link for the debate which will take place just after us. So thank you very much also for these examples. And so we have different finance projects. We get a little bit a concreter idea of what you are doing and in which direction you are working. Thank you very much for that. But I would like to bring in Felina again and also to understand a little bit better from the project you are coordinating, Felina, just now. So what would you say? You invested quite a lot into in the ecosystem of co-creation, of participation, etc. But what would be the specific needs? What do you need to address? What the obstacles you are facing currently?
Thank you very much for that question. And I will stay with the funding systems because that is what I know most about. And I will speak a little bit more abstractly. And I'll stick to my notes because this is really a question and a topic that's very close to my heart. So the obstacle and the shortcomings in the current intercontinental funding systems are, in my humble opinion, the language of intercontinental funding structures, and with that, the narratives we create and recreate through the policy documents, the action documents, and finally, the reporting along the logic of these documents. As we all know, Wainaina famously wrote in his 2005 essay on writing about Africa, "Never have a picture of a well-adjusted African on the cover of your book." And he continues, "Throughout the book, adopt a Soto voice in conspiracy with the reader and a sad, I expected so much tone." So my question in the context of funding is, how do funding structures conceptualize Africa? And how do action documents write about Africa? And I'm going to give a few words from the action document of the program that the project I'm running is based on. And I quote from the document: "Africa and the European Union have a strong and long-standing partnership based on interconnected challenges and the potential to work together in many fields." I'm not sure if the term partnership is correct here based on what happened in the last centuries, but let's focus on the potential to work together in this instance. And I continue, "Among the areas of cooperation, culture has always had a prominent place as a factor facilitating mutual knowledge and understanding, people-to-people dialogue, and respect for diversity and social inclusion." I still continue, "Nevertheless, cooperation between European and African cultural stakeholders are still insufficient. The cultural and creative sectors, especially in Africa, continue to face issues related to recognition, access to funding, scarcity of equipment, professionalization, and capacity building, which prevent a true equal partnership and their full contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals." Now, this is obviously Truman's development cooperation language from 1949, and it is quite interesting to put his inaugural address next to the Sustainable Development Goals because it's basically still the same logic and terminology. In Ziai's words, the persistence of the development discourse throughout the decades is remarkable. So as long as we have to report that Africa is not quite there yet, we will write programs to prove that. And by we, I also mean the colleagues that are writing the action documents, because they also have to report along SDGs and annual action plans. We are all caught in a very distinct logic, despite the verbal change of collaboration in the 1980s. And why is that problematic? It is problematic because it creates an attitude. In Ziai's words, again, it makes a difference whether we designate an entity as an underdeveloped country, as an age-old civilization, or as a rogue state, because each of these expressions evokes different images, allows for different political measures, and enables different perspectives and constructions of identity. So, what would I like to change in the funding ecosystem? I would like to invite us to be mindful of the language we use. When we use terms like dialogue, are we actually willing to listen, unlearn, and reconstruct? Or do we, as Radke suggests, set the outcome before we are willing to engage? In the sense of, with people like you, I cannot sit at a table. And if we sit at these tables, who speaks and who listens? Who informs and who receives? Who moderates and who complies? What is the dynamic of a funding application process, and how do we respond when this dynamic is broken? In our current program, we try to be mindful of the language we use, and we are developing a glossary with funding cooperation terminology. We would like to engage our beneficiaries, stakeholders, and partners on how they define partnership, dialogue, and mutual learning. We would like to inquire more what tools, formats, and sectors are available, needed, and valuable. We only have started, but we have 3 years of engagement, and we have the hope and aspiration that afterwards we are able to inspire the ecosystem with an informed language developed by diverse voices and polyphonic, nonlinear, and multidimensional perspectives, as Deconfining invites us to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Felina, for having really elaborated into detail some of the aspects which are linked to our topic. And in that sense, I think we get something like a little bit the picture overall. So when we started, it was about clarifying somehow also the objectives. And we found out that I think enhanced cooperation and connectivity is something we all share, and it's not natural in a world like we are for the moment. So in that sense, we still agree on that we want to cooperate. We come then to the ecosystems, and we see that these ecosystems are biased, that we are not cooperating on equal level, and that this needs action. But what we have already seen is when we look then at the funding programs, we can do exchange action so that we meet somewhere, but it's very difficult to get financing for really the development of ecosystems. And I mean in that sense, not only the ecosystems on the African continent, to see only a so-called deficit there. I see also a lot of deficit in the European ecosystems, because we are all still stuck in these old mindsets, and it's very, very difficult to come up with something which Eloisa also highlighted, to enter outside culture spheres in order to generate an understanding that culture is transversal and that we can work with the different sectors. So in development, there would be quite a framework and a logic already there for that, but it becomes quite difficult if you want to do that in practice, as seen by the symposium, I think it was in Sevilla, where it was difficult to have culture also highlighted and integrated. And this brings also us a little bit back to something what Wafa also said, in that sense that we should not only think about grants, there are lots of possibilities. So, brings me to the last round. I think we should, Yes, but I still want to have a quick round now in order to close a little bit this discussion. Because when we all know where we want to go to, why does this not yet happen? And this is now my question to all of you, maybe with a quick reply so that we still have time for questions from the audience. What are the motivations and the gatekeepers? Yeah, maybe very quickly, only in 2-3 phrases. Wafa, you are sitting close to me.
Okay.
You will start.
Okay. I will answer the question, what is preventing this from that? I
Yeah.
don't think we are going there, because changing an ecosystem, it's a process. It's something takes time, mindset, etc. And I think necessity is mother of creativity. And there is a lot of new action, creative, at least what I see on my continent. There is lots of new things are going, and alternative to this grant relationship. I can mention one, we have just finished it now. It's called Art and Stay. And it's so simple, so basic idea. It's the Airbnb for art spaces. We have art spaces who have rehearsal, recording. So you could put your space, anyone who wants to rehearsal, or someone like me. I'm not an artist, but I would rather, I was talking to you earlier, I said, next time, can we propose to guests that come to the Goethe-Institut to stay in art spaces instead of hotels? And that's what we are doing with this platform. It's called Art and Stay. And the purpose of it is, if it works, this Art and Stay will generate its own revenue and have an independent fund for the art and culture, that it's the art community who decides what to do with the money. So it's not preventing, but it's because people were waking up, there is a lot of education toward access to finance and capacity building, and we're moving, at least in the continent, there are so many other new alternative financing models, that lots of things are going on, yeah.
So, a lot of motivation, but still a way to go. Filina, do you want to go ahead before we hand over for the last statement to Eloisa?
Sure. I thought about, I'm glad we're ending on a positive note. So what impact are we making to the ecosystem? And I would have I have a wish list of 4 things we could improve, maybe. The first one is, I think it would be very helpful, again, I'm in the logic of funding systems, to have longer funding cycles so that we can actually establish new routines and pathways. Projects of 3 or 4 years, we establish something and then we're running out, and the new project has to be new, innovative. It cannot continue with the same idea. So longer funding periods would be one thing on my wish list. Secondly, I think all the funding agencies need an R&D department to conduct basic research, but also to inform the practice. I think we must get way better at analyzing what has been there already, and to go beyond the project logic of that projects always have to be successful. I think we have to be more real, more honest when things fail in a project that we designed, so that we can inform the next funding cycle in more reliable ways. Thirdly, I think we should have more strategic dialogue between the artists and cultural practitioners on the ground and the funding agencies. For example, in regular roundtables between policymakers of the EU and cultural and creative professionals from Africa, to better inform what already works on the ground. Yeah. And lastly, I think a very simple answer to what needs to be improved in intercontinental funding systems, I think absolutely that African partners should be able to apply for the lead role in cultural projects. So I think if we keep that in mind, the programs and the projects and the impacts will be much more sustainable, and the quality will be much higher. Thank you very much.
Long and meaningful list. I think we have a lot of things to bring forward, and I think WAFA, just the research and development department, would be very close to your heart.
Yeah.
Exactly. Eloisa, please go ahead. Your wish list. We still continue, or you can also just agree.
Coincido mucho con lo que ha...
Well, I can't really say much more. I think Wafa and Felina have said it all. We need to ensure that access to funds is easier. And I think there's something that is very important. The major international funds have been designed so that the same major agencies be the beneficiaries. time after time. They need to have the specifics, they have to have languages, they have to have bank accounts, they have to have internet access, and sometimes this leaves the artists and creators who are independent, the thinkers, the small associations, the small neighborhood associations, it leaves them outside. So I think that at least from the Spanish cooperation point of view, what we try to do is ensure that everyone be included under that umbrella. I think it's very important that we don't think only about the major projects. I think it's important that we think about small projects which work at a grassroots level and that work with citizens in general, the population at large.
This is certainly a very important topic too, but would bring us into many details for further discussion on selection criteria, selection panels, etc., program design, also administrative burden of small projects versus administrative burden of big ones. Can us help artificial intelligence in the future in order to have more effective administrations, etc., etc.? And we will not discuss all that now today, otherwise we will not have time for questions. So please, if there are questions, we can go ahead. Yes, please.
Thank you for your inputs. I'm Isabel Raber. I'm a curator and cultural producer and freelancer by conviction and working since more than 20 years in international context. And I would like to come back again to the question of power relations, because I have the feeling that there are some topics missing in this discussion. Wafa, you talked about equal cooperation. So let's get maybe one step back. Follow the money. So Europe, underdeveloped Africa, Walter Rodney. We still live in realities that are shaped by colonialities, right? So that's the reality in which we work, in which we try to have intercultural exchange or cultural encounters. I sometimes don't even know what these words even mean. So that's the reality, that's the starting point. And when we follow the money, it comes always from Europe or from Western countries, right? And this is the reality. And this shapes the way we work together. And this makes cooperations on eye level so difficult or even impossible. This means I work now in a project that is run by a curatorial team from Senegal, Kenya, and Germany, and we work together for years. And we are substituting this or healing this with emotional labor. That's what we do. That's work we do. That's unpaid work we do in order to do this. And as long as regularities, financial reports, etc., as long as these boundaries are so hard, it's still not possible to just forward a huge amount of money from Germany to Senegal, to give an example. It's not possible. The Senegalese partners then have to do a financial report according to German irregularities, and we here in Goethe-Institut, so you know what this means. It's crazy, it's hell, it's not logical, it's not art, it's not culture. So you are all working in this area. Can there be a solution? How are your experiences with this? Because this was somehow a bit missing, I had the feeling.
I've heard elements related to that, mainly also from Wafa. Just to take the example when you said you work on the study for the foundations, etc. So this is, I think, already a starting point to change these power relations, because when on other continents, maybe even not to be specific for the African, when there is also financing possibilities, be it from private, from other sources, from kind of cooperation, and the Europeans still use their grant system, and you find a common way of going forward, there would be...
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, finish.
Yeah.
Sorry. I think I usually say when you talk about this access, the procedures and the complexity, I think as the art community, you are asking the wrong questions here. Because, and this, I think it's a little bit linked to the lack of knowledge about resource. The problem, it's not the grant itself, the model, because the grant, it's one way, it's one form that a resource could take to help you achieve what you. There are other forms. Investment is a form. A loan is another form of resource. In-kind is a form. And the problem we have is when it becomes a problem, is when the grant is the only resource available in your ecosystem. And there we have a problem. A healthy ecosystem that could help is an ecosystem that provides all the type of resources. You have investment, you have sponsorship, you have in-kind, you have grants, and you have different sizes of grants. And also, a healthy ecosystem also needs to have a variety. As much as it needs a variety of type of resource, it needs variety of type of funders. And then answer to your question. So your question, the problem you have, we're dealing with what we call institutional funders. And institutional funder, it's by definition bureaucracy and lots of hell of safeguards, because it makes sense. It's government money. We have to send a consistent message to our government. At the same time, we expect the government to be transparent, to manage correctly the public money. And this is why they put all those procedures, because they have a lots of regulation to make sure that that money follows some standard. But if we want more flexible money, the solution is not to ask government to simplify a lot of procedure, because it's basically impossible, because that's transparency, good governance, procedures, okay? But we can simplify, but we'll never come to the level we want it. The solution is to have other players who have the flexibility to put much simpler rules, such as foundation, private sector. It's my company. If I launch a foundation, I put the rules I want. I can take the decision and say, okay, give them. I don't want to report. So what we want to have, the solution is to have what we call it healthy ecosystem. We have a variety of funder, variety of mechanisms, and we have accessibility and transparency about the resources.
I'd still look to our two colleagues on the screen. Do you want still to add something to that question? It's also...
If I may.
Yes,
Selina,
go ahead.
I think I will repeat what Wafa says, but also in the context of funding, full transparency is I think, the key, and that is between the partners. I think but not only the contracting partners should have insight into the budgets, for example, but it needs full disclosure for all the partners. And secondly, again, the EU, the European Commission, who awards the funding, for example, needs to be more aware of how financial flows work in different countries. So I think we need to do, need to do a lot more advocacy with the European Commission to make them understand how do reportings work, what is a proof of payment, and so on and so forth in different countries. So if we stay in this grant system, I think we need a lot more transparency and understanding how different systems work around the world to be able to work better with our partners that are familiar with the systems that we don't know.
I think you mentioned there a very important term, different systems in the world. And I think this is also a problem we had for many years, that when we try with the European logic to come up with funding programs in different contexts, this is often quite a tricky thing. And but I would also like to jump back also to the European continent. I think we really need also to open up our minds, and afterwards also, like you, Wafa said, you need a new mindset on the African continent. We need the same on the European continent, because it's also a high-risk strategy. When we depend solely on this grant system we have, and we see how fast the world can turn into another direction, it will be very difficult. We know that there are rumors that we will maybe not have a EU cultural funding program anymore from 2028 due to the geopolitical circumstances. Yeah, so in that sense,
Sorry,
Yes.
Silvia, me gustaría añadir una cosa.
I would like to add something regarding the question from the audience about how important it is when we come up with a project in Europe for Africa. Well, this has to change. We have to work on a project together, jointly, both Africa and Europe. And several years ago, when I started to work in the Spanish agency, we had cultural programs between Spain and Europe. And a lot of ideas were discussed. And now we would like to go back to the campus and work on these cultural aspects. And we talked to our counterparts in Senegal, and some people from Senegal came to work on this, and they suggested we do something different. They thought, why don't we think first in Africa? And we here in Africa think, what do we want for our cultural collaboration? How do we see ourselves in the future? Decide here first and then talk to you.
Y al final ha cambiado completamente.
And that has changed the approach completely. We were going to do something, and now it's not going to have a Europe-Africa campus. It's going to be a space for thinking, or with only African thinkers. I think it is these things that have to change, these little details, which can change much. And Europe must also start to listen better.
So in that sense, I think we have done what we could do today. Some elements are quite clear where we have to focus on. I think a very clear element is the ecosystemic approach, and so that we need to start, enhance, deepen that process in order to come up with more sustainable ecosystems and frameworks for funding and for cooperation in general. So, I thank you very much. Thank you to my speakers for joining and for coming.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
we are looking forward to the next panel.
panel.
I think Antonia will maybe moderate to invite people to bring to the...
Vidia Tambi, la próxima oradora va.
Vida Tandy is going to be chairing the next panel session. Thank you. Thank you very much, Antonia. I'm going to speak in French, and but you have interpretation. And this is another challenge of this deconfinement project, that we speak different languages. And interpretation is needed. So I'm going to invite the speakers of this panel to please come up here. Isabelle Patrick.
And also for all the first responders who are keeping watch and watching over.
What's happening?
And we do hope that the time spent during will be inspiring, moving, and full of intellectual and aesthetic impressions.
Bardzo dziękujemy za Państwa obecność. Życzymy wspaniałego zwiedzania. A teraz muszę się zapytać.
Merci beaucoup. José n'est pas présent avec nous.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think we're all set.
Nous n'avons pas beaucoup de temps. Je vais commencer.
Thank you very much. Since we don't have much time, let me just give you a very brief introduction. First of all, I'd like to thank Sylvia and all the panelists, the previous ones, for this very enlightening panel. which I think is perfectly aligned with the second panel, because we're also going to talk about ecosystems here. The title of this second panel is Heritage, Territorial Memory, and Resilience Through the Intangible Forms of Social Cultural Symbols. And I'd like to give you a brief introduction. Oh, I think we are connected now. How lucky with a survival festival.
On n'entend pas Carolina?
We can't hear you, Caroline, unfortunately, but we can see you.
So, big hello from Wrocław, from the opening of the 23rd Survival Art Review. Can you hear me now?
Thank you, Carolina. We are very happy to see you. Please.
It's really amazing that we can be here and to connect you there, down there in Madrid. We are just about to start our exhibition, our festival.
Could you please explain us in few words what is this festival, where it is?
We are located in Wrocław in Poland, and we have now the opening of the festival called Survival, and we will here host 5 of the deconfining works, artistic works that were produced by our deconfining artists in residence.
Thank you.
Okay, so if we are now, maybe we will watch the interviews.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. It was lovely to see you.
Yes, it is. We just finished the first panel here.
Kumba, 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 kumba.
Hello everyone, my name is Małgorzata Miśniankiewicz. I'm a curator in the Deconfining project with Art Transparent Foundation. We are just about to open the exhibition of the amazing works that the artists from Poland, Czech Republic, Tanzania and Uganda prepared for us within the framework of this project. Excuse my attire, we're still in the install process, so we can't show you every bit of installation that we have. But behind me you can see amazing work by Moses Kisa, or so-called Director Teflon, whose work treats about the acceptance of disability and struggling against disability to achieve your dreams, to fulfill your ambitions. Joseph is an amazing dancer and choreographer, and he's the main star of the video behind me. Out of the other works that we can see, and we're still connecting the cables, is Janek Moss's Speed Report, which is the work he created 5 years after his initial visit to Uganda, where he encountered Singeli music, in which he fell in love. And for our installation, Janek created 5 new video works, video clips for amazing Singeli artists from Dar es Salaam, along with the interviews and conversations about how their life changed as Singeli reached international fame and recognition.
Hi everyone, my name is Linda Dedek and I'm a Czech-German artist based in Berlin. I work with the medium film, moving image, text and performance. And for this exhibition, I have worked on a project called Not Like Other Trees, which is a sentence that I was told by a Makonde carver in Dar es Salaam. And he was talking about a tree called mpingo, or ebony. And these products are made out of this tree. For me, the question with this project, with this installation is, what can we learn from trees? And what role do trees play in the market economy? What do trees play in post-colonial justice, environmental justice, and the relationships between human and arts, because I would say the trees can be very important actors and mediators. The second part of this project talks about willows, and there I shot on Super 8mm and followed this tree freely in Eastern Europe. I hope you enjoy the films. Thank you.
Hi there, it's Miss Kia. I'm one of the fortunate few art residents from East Africa that was able to create a project for the Deconfining presentation at this year's 23rd Art Survival Review. My experimental documentary seeks to break down and understand menstruation-related lexicon and exactly how it affects us in today's day-to-day. Why do people feel the way they do about menstruation? Where exactly did that come from? And how did ideas that were once in the West travel all its way to Africa and make its way back around the globe? So if you're interested, come take a seat at my experimental documentary titled Crimson Code. I call the Crimson Code the way that we speak about menstruation. So if you'd like to see what's going on in my brain and sort of have a look through my eyes, watch my film and have fun doing it. Bye.
My name is Michaela Muszelek, and at 2025 Survival Art Festival I'm showing work with socialistic greetings, and it's based on research. It actually all started a bit earlier as a part of Bauhaus Lab in Dessau, where I learned about very specific story about transplantation, about the Eastern German architects' involvement in refugee camps for South Africans in Tanzania in the late 80s, the beginning of 90s. And that started to be very fascinating for me as a person coming from Poland, from also socialistic bloc, how that was possible, that they actually proposed some architecture, what kind of architecture solutions they implemented, because they couldn't travel, and how they actually respond to the needs and the climate there, and how it was used. And so I'm showing here a work which is the result of that research. I first went to South Africa, and thanks to the Deconfining project, I was in Tanzania last year in January, and I had a chance to see the buildings finally by my own eyes. And here in the background there is a footage, it's an archive footage from Amsterdam. It's showing a material that was recorded for a document made by a female director from Holland. And she came there in 1990 to record the Kawa camp, the second camp for refugees from South Africa. And there the building was already ready. So we can see the building and the kids in front of it playing and singing. The story started in Bauhaus, then there was Deconfining, and here we see the result of the research that took some time. And we also see the two videos, which is my comment on my trip to Tanzania, and a comment of a Tanzanian architect, which actually is based right now in Leipzig, in East German city. And she also talks about this story from her perspective. So we have this twist between person coming from East Europe to Tanzania and person coming from Eastern Africa to Eastern Europe.
I wracamy do Państwa. Zapraszam teraz Pawła Kamińskiego, żeby zabrał głos.
Szanowni Państwo, troszkę nam się wykruszyła publika, będę się streszczał. Proszę Państwa, ja bardzo się cieszę i dziękuję Karolinie Michałowi, że podjęli to wyzwanie i zdecydowali się zorganizować.
Merci beaucoup donc à Carolina.
Well, thank you so much, Caroline. Thank you so much to the Transparent Festival for sharing that with us. We have lots of artistic projects based on cooperation, as we were saying earlier. I remind you that this is a small example of what has been happening. This is just a little example of what you can find there. Now, very pleased to be here. Let me introduce myself. I come from Dakar, Senegal. My name is Vilia Tanvi. I'm a cultural advisor. And I also work in an archive. And we're going to explore today how intangible symbols, dancing, etc., are part of the memory of territories and create synergy, resilience in these territories. We want to open this panel, and let's start with this work that you see there.
Il écrivait la langue comme culture.
And he worked on culture. And so we wonder how symbols turn into acts of resilience. And that was a little homage. And the second homage we'd like to pay is to Koyo Kuo, with the quote that culture is not a luxury, it's a way of surviving. He died in May 2025, and in the African continent, everyone who works in the artistic and cultural sector, they're all extremely sad, because artistic practices and memory practices through the material company in Dakar are resilience labs. They want to create live archives that will breathe with the communities, reminds us that intangible symbols are not relics. They are instruments for reconstruction. This panel is not only academic, it's also a political lab. We dare use these very strong terms and know that social and cultural material symbols are models of development, endogenous development. Archives is not only a representation of something that is frozen. It invites us to reflect upon the actions of today and tomorrow to build a future for everyone. Out of these ruins, out of these archives and unsuspected dynamics, these need a very careful observation in order to give rise to a new ecosystem of past and present knowledge that crosses each other. Archived objects turn into live elements that interact with the modern elements to create an inclusive and sustainable ecosystem. So let's open this dialogue asking our panelists about in which way their practice can transform the non-material and turns it into power. I'm going to give the floor to our speakers so that they can introduce themselves. Isabel Raab, she works in Berlin, is specialized in decolonization strategies. So she's trained in contemporary dancing and cultural management. She has organized several exhibitions and international festivals. She received the Cross of Merit for her commitment. In 2014, she began Home Archive in the project Talking Object in 2020. And she has an artistic research lab between Damascus, Senegal, and Kenya. Hello, Isabel. We also have Patrick Accorny from École des Sables, a decolonial ecologies, that's what he works on. And we also have Jose Ramon Hernandez, who is an Afro-Cuban artist, curator of exhibitions, and he is manager of Zona Cero. And he works on collective memory, peripheral bodies, and building effective cartographies. And he intervenes in the social and community process. He won a very prestigious award, the Party of Relations, and the Villanueva Prize in the annual Lab of Contemporary Creation. Let's start with you, Isabel. I know you have a video that you would like to show us, so I give you the floor first. Thank you.
Merci. I wanted to...
Hello, thank you.
To Goethe-Institut. Thank you for the introduction. We talk about archives. I brought a video presenting an archive we recently launched. It was developed within the project I'm currently running with a team from Kenya, Senegal and Germany. It's called Talking Objects. It has two parts, a a laboratory, an artistic research project. We have artist residencies in Senegal and in Kenya, not yet in Germany. We do performances, we do workshops, conferences, etc. And accompanying this, we do this since 2020. We developed this decolonial archive, which contains objects. So basically, what we are tackling is the question, what can knowledge be today beyond the Eurocentric knowledge system? So it is about breaking with Eurocentric canon, with systems of knowledge, and make space for plurality and polyperspectivity. So what can knowledge be today? And we work a lot with objects, and I think later we will come back to this topic of tangible, intangible codes. Objects and what knowledge is inherent in objects. So, and how can we make them speak? So we have developed a polyperspectivity in viewing objects. And maybe I stop here and then we first see the video. My dear colleague Chao Tayana Maina from African Digital Heritage in Nairobi will present the digital archive, which contains everything we did in the artistic research project. So we always had video, documentations, text, etc., photographs, as well as objects. The core collection comes from the Musée Théodore Monod IFAN in Senegal, Dakar. And then we had 4 German museums, not 2 ethnological ones and 1 for applied arts, and the European Museum, which reacted on this core collection. So already the collections of objects is a kind of conversation between these objects. And then now I give the word to Chao.
Kumba, 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 kumba.
This archive is built on 3 principles, what we are calling the 3 Ps. The first one is plurality, second is play, and third is polyperspectivity. Now, when you land on the homepage of the Talking Objects Archive, you are met with this beautiful home and title screen that really, one, gives you the fundamental principle on which this archive is built. But secondly, you also presented with a random array of material in the background. Now, this was very intentional for us because we asked ourselves, what if someone doesn't know what they're looking for? Or what if you just want to explore, And so here the concept of play comes out very, very strongly. These objects behind here are selected at random, which means whenever you land on the website, you're always going to be presented with something different. And if you are interested in diving into it further, you will just need to click on an object. And in this ways, you can be able to understand more about its particular context, its relation, and any media and forms of media that are attached to it. So that's the first way of encountering information through the site, by randomly clicking something on the homepage. Now, this item might appeal to you because of its title, because of its image, and really we did not want to curtail or just stifle the ways in which people interact with items. The second principle upon which this archive is built is plurality. This plurality is captured through the structuring of information in themes, sub-themes, and multiple categories. And this is the main entry point, is this menu bar that you have over here. Information on the website, on the archive, is categorized into 5 main themes. And within each of these themes, you have sub-themes, and within the sub-themes, you have categories. And so this really speaks to the ways in which items on the website are structured, but also that items can belong to multiple categories. So here you have the theme of identity, and you also have sub-themes that are connected to this theme of identity. We've also broken down the ways in which we understand these themes, so if you're thinking, but what do we mean by colonial violence? We have broken this down through this text just below the sub-themes. What do we mean by Afrofeminism? Afrofeminism, we have also broken that down. And so this applies to all themes on the website, as well as all categories. And this particular section changes according to the theme or the sub-theme that you have clicked. And so that's the second way of entering and understanding how information is structured on this website. The third way is through polyperspectivity, which is really connected to the question and the theme of plurality and play. And this is combining two things, play and intention. So in this context, you are able to shuffle the die and understand how themes, for example, you're only interested in oral history, or you're also interested in African cities. You're able to dive into the archive according to this particular sub-theme. And so upon entry to the archive, you can navigate into different knowledge items, into different objects. And I think it's very important to say that when we speak of objects in this archive, we do not speak of objects in a traditional sense of a material artifact. Rather, we look at objects as representations of knowledge. And so this can be videos, it can be text, it can be images, it can be music, and so on. Under each object, you're also able to understand the relation, and so how this object relates to other materials in the archive. And so this concept of polyperspectivity and plurality is mirrored not just in terms of how you enter the archive and how you access it, but also in terms of how you see different objects in relation to each other. And so we invite you to use this website to deconstruct it, to play, to explore, to get lost, to find new things, to find old things, and really just to understand and relate to information in a different way. Aside from exploring the objects themselves, we have also included a large corpus of resources on how we built this archive. There's a manifesto that has guided the production of this digital infrastructure. There's a glossary that explains the terms that we have used. And there is also a way of understanding, if you're interested in the specifics of the technicalities of how the infrastructure was built, that is also available. Finally, we also have a section that we are very excited about, and this is called the playground. The playground is really dedicated to understanding how individuals can present items that mean or relate to a story they're trying to tell. So this is a curated section in which members of our community can find different items, can find different objects on the archive, and weave together a narrative that speaks to them and speaks to a thematic that they're trying to bring about. Basically, how do you tell a story through these items? And in this way, the playground really serves as a primary platform and entry point into combining storytelling, curation, and exploration. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for witnessing and joining us in this dream. This is not a final product, and we hope to continue building it as we move along. But we really, really do sincerely hope that we can explore this archive together, and that you can send us your feedback on what worked, what didn't work, and this can be a living archive. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much. In fact, this is a project that is absolutely fascinating and which encompasses many different realities, problems that we try to find a solution to. We find solutions for different problems. So my first question for you, Isabel, is this one. Would an archive of this kind necessarily destroy the traditional museum? So the presentation of these archives, do you think?
Yes, I mean, in the beginning, we were like really hardly discussing if an archive itself isn't also a Western idea. And if we develop a decolonial archive, if we do not like perpetuate museums' practices of possessing, preserving, presenting in the digital. Yeah. So we were very close to like really drop the idea. But then we had a different approach, and I think Zhao explained this very good in like reclaiming the archive and turning it upside down, like really completely changing the categories, changing the way objects/subjects are made to speak, are connected to each other. Yeah, so really having another practice. And I would say, yes, I mean, Fabian Sarr once said the Western archive is exhausted, les archives occidentales sont épuisées. Yes, they are. So the question remains, do we still need archives or not? And we say, yes, but let's reinvent them.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much. I now am going to ask my neighbor on the right. Could you explain, please, your work around these sensitive cartographies? Actually, could you provide a little bit of insight regarding your work and the projects in question? Well, above and beyond explaining the cartography, which at the end of the day isn't really a project, it's more of a toolkit that we've been working on ever since years ago. And just very quickly, SICAN is a place for research, social research, which was born in Cuba around 2014. The idea being to be there throughout the creative process with thinkers, with creators, with artists and cultural agents who worked on the sidelines of Cuban cultural entities, occupying different spaces in the city that were not institutions, that were not designed for the scenic arts or for installations. We began to work in hairdressers' shops, in abandoned theaters, in dump sites, and we established a dialogue with the neighbors, and that is how we launched an entire exercise of epistemological construction and tools and living practice, artistic practices, building a dialogue that would really make sense for the neighbors, for the population, and for us as creators, guaranteeing that we could research. After our migration towards Spain and Canada, censorship, because of one of our most recent works that addressed the concept of structural fascism in the country, and that is actually where we begin to see the deoccupation of spaces. So in order to continue to breathe and create, I came to Madrid and I began to work here. And here, I have to say that the context is apparently very different, but we also understood that there was a major division between hegemonic and endogamic art that we see in major cultural institutions. We see in the programs the same artists, the same dynamics, the same approaches, the same logic, the same funds that are distributed among the same hands. So when we arrived here, when OSICAN arrived here, well, we were able to create with Afro spaces, with Conciencia Afro Association, and working, thinking, creating, establishing a dialogue with the Afro-descendant, migrant, sex, gender, who live in Spain, in Madrid. The cartography is sensitive, affection-based. The whole trip itself, which must be generated from the self, from the innermost, with the necessary tools. I thought that what we heard before was very interesting. We heard talk about the funding. Well, it's a whole exercise that calls for ongoing imaginative work from the margins in order to really be able to achieve the objective. And we know that we are at a distance from some funds, some possibilities. But I think that actually might be a good thing because it allows for the ongoing development of the imagination in a context which is, as I said, increasingly endogamic, a context which is Spanish, but also European, very fashion-oriented. Now we're talking about decolonization, and I say that this is fiction because I see that the tools are exactly the same. I see the same videos that we saw before. African children dancing. I don't see children from European daycare centers. I don't see children dancing about celebrating Europe in front of a European cathedral. So this is exactly it. We are giving it a new name. We are talking about a new discourse, but I have the feeling that it's the same ongoing perpetuation of the colonial order, which is updated, which is made up, which puts on different garments and makeup. And I'm saying it openly. These are spaces that we want to work in. Oxycan and Afrospace in our discourse that looks inside, that is inwards bound, and think really about the tools we are using, the conversation we have with the context, the creative and community. What is this project doing for our people? Is it good for the community, or is it just another object? Is it just another intent, another attempt to colonialize a museum? We don't have answers to these questions, but these are questions that are being increasingly posed. We're working hard, and thus we see how a project is born, and we have two projects actually. I'm very excited about them. We talked about the archive that we're building. It's a project which is called Mitang. We were there thinking about building an archive. We're thinking about the archive. We call it ITANG. Memories, communities, and I can't remember what the third word was, says the speaker. But it's a project which is keen to call upon the memory and the presence and the historical figure, if you will, of the Afro-descendant community in a context of Spain, something which has been denied, and in official discourses in Spain, the presence of African people. This is contemporary, and so there is that deletion of the identity in the historical memory. There's a deletion. And if we think about these spaces, which are spaces where political, community, and artistic actions take place, and calling upon that historical identity, the identity of accumulated memories, well, we can definitely make ourselves heard. And we're working on a 3-year project, which is the construct of this archive, the Afro Archive. And furthermore, we're working on the development of the residence, the border residence. We'll see about that. We're working on the research. These are residences for research and artistic creation, which is there for the creative process carried out by Afro-descendant, migrant, racialized, gender, sex around the Afro space. And I know that this year we, after talking about the deconfining, well, we are working together on that activity involving the residences. And this is where we begin to see other possibilities step forward, concepts and tools that stem from the research that breathes that live archive, that memory, intangible, spiritual, and research and investigation, which is connected to the territories of origins, but is also connected to a community that's here today, a community that does no longer belong to neither here nor there. These are the processes that are safeguarding or making other epistemological possibilities, other tools necessary for the creation thereof, and that are actually posing other questions that will be discussed openly in the community from the theoretical vantage point, using the most sensitive tools from that living space, which is the creation. I'm sorry, I tend to ramble on, says the speaker. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Definitely an interesting transition. And I think that you're making a reference to many concepts that have been referred to in other comments. I see a word that comes up once and again. The word is territory. Territories which we explore. What are they, those territories? We talked about that in the previous panel, right? What are the projects that are of interest? Are they universal territories? Are they territories that are more limited, that are easier to identify, and that we want to approach because we want to include them in the network? How do these territories, how do these memories respond and react? I heard Isabel when she talked about games, and I heard the word resistance, so I'm not really sure how to liaise these two concepts, these two terms in our contributions. And now I'm going to give the floor to Patrick. I'm going to hark back to his comments because I wasn't able to really explain what you do and what you do. You're a choreographer, you're a researcher in contemporary African dance, and you look at traditional African dances, especially focusing on rhythm and the political dimension of the body in movement. From the École des Sades, you were the director, this is in Senegal, and you work with international entities such as the University of Arts in Amsterdam and the University of Bahia in Brazil. You explore the intersections between dance, memory, and colonial teaching with the aim of knowing how to flesh out via the performance the teachings and learnings and cultural exchanges. So I would return to that question for you, Patrick, and after that, I think that Isabel and maybe Jose Ramon can also react. What is the role of bodies and archives in the decolonization of these imagined territories? That's the question. Well, hello, and thank you so much for the kind invitation. Let me begin by saying that I'm not here as myself. I'm here in representation of the École des Sables. What is the École des Sables? It is a training center for professionals established by Germaine Aconi and Elefant. They are dancers. They are African dancers, and the North African dancers, perhaps more specifically. So, in an attempt to respond to the question as to what is it that we do at the École des Sables, I would say that the following. First of all, we need to understand that the École des Sables, I'm going to say it openly, was a training center. But we need to remember that it is also what I have come to call an achieved utopia, which means that it's a space that was dreamed up by Germaine Aconi to create and to make this place the mother house of dance in Africa. It's important to bear this in mind, the mother house, because it is chock full of meaning and it's very symbolic. What is the mother house? The mother house is what allows you to build other homes. But what is the mother home? What is the mother house? Well, it's a house where you dance. So that's the body. We begin with the body, and this is important. We begin with the body. It's not the performance. It's not the show. It's not the representation. We begin with the body. Now, the body, of course, is full of knowledge. We talk about traditional dances. Yes, traditional dances that have come to us from our forebears. Why do we dance? Because of the rites, because of the rituals, because of the events, because of the community, because you want to establish a connection. Not for pleasure. It's because we need to dance that we dance. Because we want to be together. It's all about togetherness. It's about achieving things together. It is a spiritual need. Establishing a connection with other realities. It is about reaching out to the ancestors. It's knowledge. So the École des Sables is initially an acknowledgement that we are the holders of knowledge in our bodies. So if we're talking about a body and we're talking about our ancestors, then our body is an archive, a living archive. So this is something that is not fixed in time and that will not be fixed in time, because we're talking about traditions and something that is fixed and doesn't move and doesn't budge. But no, that's not what I believe at all. So this place is in opposition to other realities. It's as if we resist the environment. Senegal, of course, has been colonized, and many things were forbidden, including some dances. So this school, the École des Sables, says, we're going to dance what our ancestors taught us to dance, but we're not going to stay still. We're going to turn this dance into a living dance. We're going to evolve the dance, but we will decide. We will decide how we evolve the dance. We will not accept criteria that are not our criteria. So I'm coming directly to what you said, decolonizing the body. This is very important. So this school, the École des Sables, is what? Well, it's trajectories, it's pathways, but it's also wounds. Why wounds? Well, because we were colonized. Our bodies were massacred, were tortured, were killed, were forbidden. So we carry the wounds, we bear those wounds. We return home, we return to the École des Sables, and it's not only that we are resisting, no, we are also healing. So we come to the École des Sables to be healed, to be cared for, because we accept our body. We reconcile with our body. We resist, so it is a dance of who we are and who we want to become. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Okay, thank you. So we talk about decolonizing, and we also talk about resilience. That's the future. And actually, I think that resilience is a word that is important. I would like that because we live in a world that is troubled and that is subject to impacts and shocks, well, we need to think about the politics of the body. It is a memory, I repeat, it is a memory, but it is not fixed in time. It is alive, it is shared, it breathes and lives, and it works on the backbone, because the backbone is that relationship that we establish with the world and with our past, with our ancestors. We can cross borders. We can cross the timelines. Why? Because, as I just said, Africa is not a country. Africa is many Africans at the École des Sables from many different countries. Central Africa, Southern Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, a little bit from Northern Africa, from the Maghreb, a little bit from East Africa, and definitely Western Africa. So we've got all of those different Africas there. They come to the École des Sables, and it's also the Black diaspora. Afro-descendants is how we call them now, but it's also Asians and Caucasians, you see, at the École des Sables, and everyone's welcome. So we know and we repeat that, yes, we cross borders. And let me now wrap up by saying that we're not just a fancy shop window. We need to understand the complexity, the cosmology, the clout of the movement. These are ideas that resonate with our spirituality. So it is finding a balance for those relationships that allow us to transmit knowledge. We talked about the funds, right? Oh my goodness. We, at the École des Sables, we loved the funds, the European funds, but oh my goodness, that had a price tag. At the end of the day, it is obvious that the École des Sables is what it is, and what I do definitely is very political. Thank you very much, Patrick. Indeed, yes, territories of the body that liaise with a collective territory, the groups. Indeed, what territories are we talking about here? Are we talking about the world? Are we talking about Africa, which is very difficult to actually understand and apprehend? What are those re-territorializations? And I would ask Isabel now, do you think that maybe computers are a way of establishing that new territorialization without reproducing the colonial logics that be? That's my question for Isabel.
So first, when we go, first, thank you actually for the input. It resonates very much, and thank you. It was wonderful. Yeah. So when we talk about the virtual space and the digital, we of course have to be very careful where we are. I'm talking about big data. I'm talking about where do the server are located. I talk about which companies earn from licenses for databases, etc. So the economic side of this is tricky. Also that stealing of objects happens again, because I know that colleagues, for example, for the International Inventories Program in Kenya, which was an initiative mapping all the objects that were stolen and stored in museums all over the world. It was an initiative based in Kenya, and they were so hardly struggling of even getting the information and even getting the digitized files of the stolen artifacts. So in our case, to avoid this, we like flee into the open source world. We worked with open source, which is then a system that gives back to the open source community. So no one benefits of it. So our database is based on open source. The server is located in Kenya, not in the US, not in Europe. So these were things that were very important for us. And also another point why we decided to work with open source is technology is never neutral. We just think it's neutral, but it's not. It's made of zeros and ones, and it's made of systems that, again, follow a Western kind of categorization and hierarchization. That's it, especially. So when we work with museums databases, then you have knowledge systems that hierarchize knowledge. So we have the academic knowledge, the written word, but what about all the intangible, the knowledge of the body, the knowledge of the spirituality, etc. These are no categories. So we build up our own system. So that's the technology side. And then on the other side, I mean, the digital space is also a space of imaginary, l'imaginaire, and it's a very, very important energy and an important tool to like changing a mindset, and also then in a second way, changing the reality. And maybe the digital space could be a space where this imagination can already come to life.
Merci beaucoup, Isabelle.
Thank you so much, Isabel. Jose Ramon, I'm going to ask you to take this now, because it has to do with these stories that are so sensitive that you described. to try to work and think about those memories that are more or less authentic, and that projection towards something that is longer lasting and inclusive, the pluralism of voices and of stories that also allow us to look at the innermost spheres. So how do we strike a balance between that collective memory and these pluralistic identities?
Well, thank you so much for what you said. Now, I always have a conflict with the idea of plurality, because in the idea of plurality, sometimes I feel that at the end it becomes endogamic. When we look at universal history, the world, a world managed by Europe, colonized by Europe, approaching, because there are so many ways to approach things from culture. The way they do it can be very different depending on how you approach things. So the idea of collective memory, plural memory, or the equation, unfinished equation of multiple singular, authentic, irrepeatable identities that you need to listen to, that you need to respect, and maybe you need to unlearn. And so there's something that someone said that I find very interesting when we talk about being a rebel and reconciling. And I think that has a lot to do with the spaces of creation that we imagine, or of political incidents. Because when I talk about creative tools that are sensitive, I'm not talking about stories, anecdotes. I'm not talking about anecdotes. I'm talking about an exploration connected with the knowledge of the body, very much connected with that knowledge, community knowledge, and how from there is learning on the one hand. And necessarily that takes you to a radicalization of listening, of unlearning. And that is so important when it comes to creating these collaborative links between communities or between people, how there is a listening radicalization exercise, and how constantly you can generate this exercise of unlearning. I always like to say, and it's a fad now talking about multicultural and equality, and I say, no, we're not equal. And we are never in the same conditions. And if we are going to collaborate, the first thing that we need to take into account is that communities from Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, we are not in the same conditions. We are not equal, because we're communities, and communities that have been ravaged. And it will take years to heal. So from that acknowledgement of the fact that we are not equal, we could start talking. From that recognition of the need to leave space for auto-representation of communities, to imagine how this is being beneficial in this territory, or the self-representation, which is a basic principle against what everything that is colonial, in order to reconduct ways, because all the time towards these territories, there is a hyper-formalization. All the time I see and I suffer in all the spaces that I've seen in the Caribbean, with the Afro-Caribbean practices, and with the practices in different contexts in African countries, how they have whitened things, how they are taking them to follow their way of doing things. And there you see that we need a new tool, and how in those exchanges it's very important to knit or practice unlearning so that those multiple worlds can have spaces, and so they won't turn into one single world that in order to be contemporary it must be seen that way, or to be conceptually and academically deep. It has to be translated in this way. So I'm still thinking about that idea of reconciliation, the idea of revelry, and how from our project, I'm not talking only about collaboration, I'm talking about a project of something together, you and me, and how we, in that exercise of the imagination, we include human and real possibilities to get to know each other without thinking about the everything as one single world. We're all equal. We're all brothers and sisters. We're all the same. No, we're not equal, because even in those multicultural rooms and museums, you see an exercise of unbalance, or of you see an object, for example, you don't know where it's coming from. And now everyone wants to be spiritual. Now everyone wants to reconcile. And you see ancestral practices that require initiation, that belong to a specific community that has protected those practices, and they are alive. I am Baba Locha. My family comes from Nigeria, and I practice many of these practices that date back to thousands of years, and we don't need anyone coming and writing how it was. It has survived by practicing it. So today, there is a delocation of all these things, and suddenly you find a mask that belongs to a sacred ritual in a given territory, but you see it in a museum, or you find, well, there is an obsession right now, and this is where I find the new pillage, because when I see the delocation and I see the pillaging, of everything, why that mask? And you say, oh, what a beautiful mask, but that mask is nothing. That mask has the strength of the invisible, the spiritual strength that keeps it there where it is put. So I go on and on, I'm sorry.
We have a very short time. Donc c'est, en tout cas, cela soulève bien.
In any case, I wonder how the intangible can be or is a space for reparation. Archives are works of art. They're not really tombs. So how could we rethink about these archives, but in a different way, as perhaps tools of power, technologically speaking, in museums and elsewhere, in order to turn them into instruments to build? For a more sustainable world, for a fairer world. So I'm going to give each one of you the floor for the last time, and then the audience.
Shall be for the people. So that's not for the institution and its collection, whatever, but for the people. And this should be something playful, and this should be something for the future. So archives should contain the future, not the past. And they should also face the gaps and the grief and whatever. Maybe that's an approach.
Thank you.
Que ce soit les archives ou le patrimoine.
Let's see. Well, intangible patrimony, heritage, I think it's important now to freeze things. Not, I speak as a dancer. I am a dancer, and I think continuity is important because if we danced with our forebears, we're still doing so. When we talk about tradition, we shouldn't freeze it. It's alive. And that is where challenges lie, because when we talk about archives, we tend to establish categories and classify. It is important, but we need to bear in mind that it is something that is alive, that evolves, that is transformed, that resists, that disturbs. It's something that moves. Let us not forget that. For me, well, that is my struggle. And that is why traditional dance, yes, but what or which traditional dances? Which ones are we talking about? My grandparents or the ones that I reinterpret in my body today, taking into account who I am? It's the history that I have within me, or the history, or the way I interpret that history. So it shouldn't be frozen, not to set it in stone. So we should rethink temporality and interconnections. Well, I have to agree with the importance of allowing for that bringing up to date of knowledge and not freeze things. And this is why, related to the Afro archive that we are working on, I like to think that the archive, I like to think of this archive in the sense that the document that is there, the knowledge, can be touched, can be rewritten, can be reinterpreted. And it's the idea of deep disorder, because Fanon said, in order for there to be a real colonization system, it must be a process of deep chaos. And the archive that has been extremely carefully organized and structured have the possibility to shake it, break it, reinvent it. For that is a possibility of injecting oxygen into it and see things that are unsuspected when it comes to imagining a process of keeping our memories in a vessel. So to allow it to live in a process of chaos, I think is something very sensitive, which might give rise to other processes, other memories, other possibilities of other worlds. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. That was interesting. What Jose is saying is interesting. Do we have questions from the audience? Wafa? You need to use a microphone because this is being streamed.
Merci. Non, seulement pour dire que ça m'a sonné un peu terrible qu'à la maison.
No, I just wanted to say that it sounded a bit terrible that
Je n'ai pas dit qu'on ne pouvait pas danser par plaisir. Je parlais d'une manière.
Don't dance for pleasure. Well, I know there are occasions when something is to be celebrated, a birth or a marriage, But the essence of dancing is not to do it for pleasure, but to be connected, to be together, as I said at the beginning. It is the principle of Ubuntu, of unity. What is important is the relationship and us being together. The important thing is the relationship, and from that stems joy and enjoyment, but that is not the main thing. I was talking from the point of view of tradition, and from the point of view of school, well, it's vocational training. And we train professionals, but professionals, no matter how disciplined they are still professionals that enjoy dancing, because you're not going to go to a dancing school if you don't feel passion for dancing. But joy is never the first criterion or the first reason to dance. From the point of view of tradition, that is what I meant. Wafa?
Digital and the colonial relationship to whatever is digital, beyond what you have mentioned with regards to the server and owning where is the data. The problem is also the metadata used to train whatever digital platforms or algorithms. We'll come to the algorithm, it's another issue. But the data that is used, is it data dominantly representing some kind of part of the word culture, or because many parts of the world we don't produce this similar content? So the AI is trained with the data that is probably reperpetuating biases and colonial ideas. So that's one major challenge. The second, when it comes to the cultural creative industries in general, not specific sector specific, is those platforms or those moteurs de recherche, research motors. So we're facing double issues when it comes to access to archives, because the untransparency, and that came with the, I'm part of the group of experts with UNESCO that worked on the recommendation on the cultural diversity in the digital era, and the algorithm and the non-transparency of those major channels like you use, I don't want to name, the thing you use to search, on the internet. So we have no control as users on what material comes first when you do your research. And there is a total untransparency about what's put ahead and now. So beyond the fact that you own the server, we're facing the and that's the principle which now the cheval de bataille, which is one of the battles with as a sector and the global we should have together, is the principle of discoverability. So it's not enough nowadays to generate content. There is another battle to have, so that content is accessible and discoverable. You can, if the algorithm does not favor you and you access to that kind of archives and that kind of narrative and that kind of content, it's like you've done nothing. So this is also a challenge as a content creator we can face from different perspectives.
Merci beaucoup. Isabelle, tu veux dire un mot là-dessus ou
Yes, would you like to add anything? There is an artist from Nigeria who works in the US, or worked for some time in the US and then went back to Lagos, and he worked on a system of choreographic guessing. I'm not aware of all the problems that he had to overcome, but he overcame those problems. But what I mean by this is that there are artists who are working on these things and who are trying to elude problems such as the use of technological knowledge, which are fundamentally from the West and therefore biased, at least in part. Thank you. Thank you so much for your remarks. And just as a brief conclusion, let me remind you of some things that were raised in this conversation. First of all, we need a good anchor. we need different voices, although Jose doesn't agree very much with me, and that policies must be based on a local knowledge and not on imported models, that we have to go towards transversality. And this coincides with the previous panel, that we need to make progress towards the future. And I'll close with the quote, "The universe is built with the translation of memories." Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to all the panelists for their thoughts. Thank you to our audience, the Goethe-Institut, and the technicians, and all the people who have contributed to this event. And thank you to our artists and to Max, whom I'm going to give the floor to.
Thank you so much. I don't know, do you want to stay? It's not going to take too long, but also you can leave the stage if you want to. You want to stay? No, you want to go. Okay, then give me the stage. All right. As long as you're leaving, I want to extend my thanks to the translators, which are doing an amazing job today. So thank you so much for translating the Spanish and the French for me, because I don't know any of those. I should, but don't tell my French teacher. So I have the honor to give you just a few words, not more than 10 minutes of what I've been hearing today and how it may relate to the work we are doing with CPPD in Germany. CPPD is a network for pluralistic memory culture, which already I think hits a spot, because we just heard now about the problems that may exist within the concept of plurality. And I think this is already where I would like to engage in this discussion, because thank you again very much. This was very inspiring. So talking about plurality, one thing that I heard now was this idea to, well, you could call it politicize the idea or repoliticize the idea of plurality, or to have a more power-sensitive idea of what it means to do plurality. Which I think makes sense as soon as you start understanding that plurality may be weaponized by the dominant culture, which may be European, it may be white, it may be non-Jewish German, however you want to call it, in order to distract us from the critique that is kind of written into the practices of minority cultures, the practices of resistance. So being more power sensitive in our notion of plurality may be the next step to take. At least in Germany, and as far as I know, in Northern America as well, plurality and diversity has been basically used as a catch-all positive terminology to kind of paint the new utopia on the horizon. So now we see it doesn't work this way. And I would argue that we'll find the same thing, especially with regard to Germany, concerning memory culture, which also has been used as a very positive term to kind of establish the notion of the good Germany, the having become good again Germany, which is very much connected to the construction of German dominant identity. And especially in the last 2 years, more still, but it has intensified since October 7th in Germany, the battle cry of never again, which is very closely connected to memory culture and to this idea of the lessons we have learned from the past, and by this also connected to the archive and the things we're talking today about, has become a tool in the hands of a more conservative, right-leaning society and government to discipline the other, that is not seen as connected to the memory culture that the German state means when it says never again. Which is curious, because in a way it's necessary to remind the German state time and again that whatever we call memory culture is already the result of all those different groups that have kind of put their inspiration and ideas and work into this Erinnerungskultur. And this is especially important because a lot of the groups that have been now kind of taken out of the framework of memory culture have been the first victims of the continuation of right-wing violence, which has happened after 45, even though German's story of becoming good again contradicts these realities. So here we can already see how power uses memory in a way to kind of one, functionalize memory in order to discipline the other, to hierarchize and put order into the space of radical diversity, which German society and any other society kind of has as a normal state of how it is. But also because memory culture, the closer it gets to power, becomes less of a play field for resistance, at least on a let's say, open plane. So a lot of just one question which I would like to kind of distribute to today's discussion is whether this idea of memory work as community work is something that we can only do as long as we remain in this zone of liberty, which is a zone of liberty which has not yet been occupied by the state, not yet been occupied by power. But once it is occupied by power, we have to politicize, we have to kind of change our notion of what memory work actually means. And I think this is where CPPD also kind of has been working on in the last years. And this, I think, is something that maybe also on a larger scale, our notions of diversity and plurality have to move forward to now. A more concise idea of what it means to kind of connect the idea of being different and of difference and of radical difference to this notion of a political idea of maybe, I don't know, violent-free practices or power critique or the critique of an idea of memory as a tool for redemption, which in Germany is very, very central to this whole state-established, not only, I always say state, but also dominant culture-established idea of becoming the good German again. So I come with a maybe sad message, but still I think maybe interesting input that the fact that people remember does not necessarily mean that things are moving ahead. Just doesn't have to mean that. It can also be used as a tool of repression, it can be used as a tool of hierarchizing, it can be used as a tool of violence. I'm afraid, as it is in discourse games, it's all about the practices people then establish and the things they use their discourses for. And I've heard a lot of very inspiring things today that people have been using it for, and I think it's exactly the lanes we need to use and we need to go down now. And this connects to the first panel that maybe even there's a theater maker from Berlin who said, if you want to kill a movement, fund it. So there is something to be gained by not having funds, I would say, even though I'm talking against our own desires to be funded beyond this year. But still, there's something that we also lose, because then the other side can always say, well, if you want to have the money, don't be so, critical. It's all very subtle, but it happens. It happens a lot. So with those words, I think I would like to end on a note of the things that you are going to see now. With CPPD, we have engaged in very different ideas. We have developed, kind of picked up on very different strategies that have already existed. We do not invent stuff. We kind of pick it up and try to amplify it, try to connect people in their work connected to memory. And we have this framework, which is a physical frame too, which is called DML, Dynamic Memory Lab. We have one Dynamic Memory Lab just put up now, and a special thanks to our team, which arrived on Saturday, took down the old one, which is on cultural codes of Sinti and Roma communities, and now has built up the new DML, which is called Cycles of Decolonization, which we'll hear something about from Katja Severino in just a second. Just one last word about this. we invite you very much to kind of enter the space. We are very happy that we have a second dynamic memory lab now, only for the Iberian Peninsula, so it can move around here. And maybe southern France, we haven't really talked about that yet, but please, if you see anything, if you find that there's something that you would like to show wherever you are connected to, then let us know. And now we're all going to move out of this very warm room. I'm afraid it's not colder outside, but we'll try. Let's move out of this place. Let's go there. I think there's tapas. There's going to be art, like performances after the introduction of Katja. Stay with us, and thanks for having us here.